Welcome, everybody. Happy New Year. And I'm so excited to be seeing everybody and networking with so many friends from all over the world and from so many different sectors, business leaders, and members of government. We have ambassadors, commercial attaches, NGOs, and it's really so amazing to see how our community, our business community is continuing to grow as we drive these consistent driving business in Africa events. And yes, this is our third virtual event. We've been holding many events locally around the world, but I think that the virtual space is just proving to be such an effective way for us all to connect from around the world. And indeed, we have people from all over the world here, from I believe over 5 continents and from countries all over Africa. And we are here really because we care about Africa. And beyond all the challenges, we see the tremendous potential and the tremendous opportunity, specifically in how we can drive sustainable and scalable growth. And that's done through the private sector. Yes, Empower Africa is a values-driven company. And what we're doing here is building a global business community that really sees the potential and thinks with its heart and mind and how to address the many challenges on the continent. And what we are doing at Empower Africa, just to give a bit of an overview, because we also do have many new people joining us, is we are uniting people around a mission to accelerate empowerment by driving investment, trade, and job creation. That's what we're about. We're a business with a soul and a community with a soul. And we have 3 strategies at Empower Africa. First of all, we are accelerating connectivity. We're identifying all the business leaders, all the thought leaders, and bringing them to one table, to one platform, and accelerating the connectivity. Second of all, we're optimizing communication on how we could communicate with each other. And third, we are maximizing the collaboration and focusing on specific business opportunities and specific deals. We're bringing these deals to light. We're driving transparency and highlighting the tremendous opportunities that are on the continent. And indeed, there are so many opportunities. If it's from the agriculture sector, and there's over 60% of the world's arable land is in Africa, if it's the triple-digit growth in FDI in the tech sector, and if it's the 7 out of 10 fastest growing economies in the world in 2019. So indeed, we are creating a significant positive awareness on Africa, on its potential and the future. And it's so great to be coming together and bringing so many leaders that are really being successful and making a difference all over the continent. So thank you for coming, and I look forward to a great session, a great event, and we're going to be having our first keynote, the first session, our keynote by Dr. Raymond Gilpin, who I'll introduce in a minute, and we're going to speak about also the rice crop after that, and how to boost rice production in Africa. And then we're going to speak about the housing sector and the tremendous opportunities in the housing sector. And then we're going to have also some business opportunities, some companies that are raising capital who we've identified, and we want to provide them the stage and get the attention to help them continue to grow and succeed. So without further ado, let me introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Raymond Gilpin. He's the chief economist and head of strategy at the UNDP, the Regional Bureau for Africa. And thank you, Dr. Gilpin. You've been an inspiring friend for already a number of years, and I really appreciate you coming and providing such thought leadership to our audience. So we'll, without further ado, the keynote, the role of business in Africa's post-COVID economic transformation. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy. And Dr. Gilpin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ezzy, for that generous introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here and to be able to have a conversation with such a diverse group, a group of people interested in and involved with business in Africa. I'm not a business owner, but I've been asked to just say a few words and probably have a bit of a conversation with you about the role that business could play in Africa's post-COVID economic transformation. It was Winston Churchill who is reputed to have said that we should never waste a good crisis. And I think COVID has given us an opportunity to rethink and reimagine Africa's economy and Africa's economic contribution, both within the continent and globally. And today I want to just talk about a few issues in this regard. Before COVID, a lot of people saw Africa as a continent on the move. We've seen a lot of promise, the growth. We also saw the slow increase in Africa's vibrant middle class, which a lot of people call the consumer class. We are acutely aware of the demographic transitions that would make the African market one of the largest by the end of the decade. We've also recognized its vast human and physical resources. But we're conscious of the stubborn challenges that persist. Crime and corruption, weak institutions, structural fragility, infrastructure gaps. All of those things continue to hold African countries back. And then last year, and then to understand the economy, I've looked at 4 economies: the macro economy, the political economy, the socio-economy, and planet economy. One of the things that we could look at in terms of the macro economy is that even though we had significant increases in productivity, jobs did not keep pace. Inequality was not addressed. And the structural rigidities, i.e., there was not a lot of transformational, sectoral, within sectors and across sectors in African economies. The political economy was still a little dire. We saw tendencies towards democratization, but issues relating to resource and state capture continued. The contestation of nations within states was also one of the challenges. And on the socioeconomic side, the weak social indicators, particularly regarding health and education and gender. On the planet side, there was a mixed bag. On the production side, we were not as culpable as many other regions on the planet. CO2 emissions are not that as high as elsewhere. And the material footprint, even though it is not high, but most African countries belong to value chains that do have quite a heavy material footprint. And then last year there was COVID. All African countries have reported cases. As of this morning, a little over 3.1 million cases reported. Almost 74,000 Africans have lost their lives. But again, this is a mixed bag across the continent. We see concentration. The top 10 account for over 80% of the total cases. Africa accounts for 2.8% of global cases, but almost 17% of world population. All of these speak to the mixed nature. But even though the epidemiology has not been that dire, the economic and socioeconomic impacts of COVID in Africa have been pretty stark. We've seen a halt in GDP. We see trade weakened, because of the combined demand and supply side shocks that African economies faced. We have a debt crisis as revenues fall and expenditures continue to rise. We see both external and domestic debt beginning to become a problem. Increased unemployment, particularly in Africa's non-formal economy. I will talk a little bit about this later. So this is where we are now. And we are now thinking about 2021 and 2022 as transition years for Africa economically and socio-economically. And the question that I'd like to table is, what role could the business sector play in promoting and supporting economic transition that delivers jobs, economic transition that's environmentally sustainable, and economic transition that enhances the well-being and welfare of every African citizen? How do we do this? First, I'd like to take us back to 1970, when Nobel laureate Milton Friedman wrote his seminal article in the New York Times. And basically he said, the business of business is business. And there have been a lot of conversations about this particular paper. It has defined the way we think about it. But in an African context, is the business of business really business? Or are there larger considerations? About a couple of decades ago, there was a lot of talk about seeing businesses not just as corporations, but as responsible global citizens. And the whole issue relating to corporate social responsibility became an issue. I'm not going to go into all the challenges of Friedman's proposition, or the lively debate that it has engendered. But I'd just like to challenge you to think as business people, as investors, as people who own businesses both on the continent and working in the continent. How do we rethink the way we focus on the business we do, the activities we engage with, the way we deploy our various financial and non-financial resources to be able to help move Africa forward in this particular area? One of the more recent developments in this particular debate has to do with a concept called the economics of mutuality, which was researched by the Mars Corporation, and it's now being hosted by the Said Business School at the University of Oxford. And basically what this looks at is it builds on some of the propositions of the corporate social responsibility. It interrogates businesses as change agents on continents like Africa, and it asks a fundamental question, which is, how could businesses balance the value created for shareholders and the value it creates for others? In other words, how do we have an ecosystem approach that promotes corporate well-being, but at the same time helps create value within the markets in which they operate? And this is all contingent upon a very simple question. When you look at the African continent and business prospects, do you see a glass that's half empty or a glass that is half full? Or in other words, are you hamstrung by the various challenges and problems and institutional weaknesses that we see? Or do you see the potential of not just scaling up, but doing business in a way that creates jobs, that expands opportunity, and that ensures sustainability. One opportunity that does exist is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area arrangement, which was launched a few days ago in Accra, Ghana, and it looks at creating a One Africa market. This is likely to increase the incomes across Africa by 450 billion, boost imports by 560 billion, pull 30 million people out of extreme poverty, expand the market size, and also hike wage gains for both men and women. What does this mean for you as business leaders? What does this mean as you think about scaling up? These are questions that we need to focus on. At UNDP, we have looked at this issue, and we earlier last year, around this time last year, we published what we call the Africa Promise, which is the renewed strategic offer in Africa that has 6 strategic impact areas and 6 foundational enablers. And we see business as being pivotal in taking Africa from where it is now to the next level. And this is not based on aid or trade as usual. This is an assets-based approach that focuses on household incomes. Because if we can boost household incomes, we are then seeing we then see the possibilities to improve the labor force and labor force contribution in the economy, and we also see an opportunity to grow the market. So from both the production and the consumption side, a household incomes focus is really useful in thinking about what business and how they do it. And there are many entry points when we think about economic transformation. As I mentioned a couple of decades ago, it was all about corporate social responsibility. How could corporations invest in their environments and ecosystems? Personally, I don't think that is the best idea. Because it leads to what I call the projectization of the engagement. And it does not really sow roots that are transformative from an economic perspective. What I'm going to leave on the table for conversation is, how do we focus on the labor market? And there are 4 quick areas I want to highlight. The first is, how do we re-engineer value chains? As I mentioned earlier, Africa over the last couple of decades has witnessed phenomenal growth. We see the data points, 7 out of 10 of the fastest growing countries in any year on the African continent. But why are we not seeing job growth? Why are we not seeing significant reductions in poverty? It is because the value chains are such that even though you have productivity and production, most of the value is outside the African countries. So how, as businesses, do we re-engineer the value chain so we are engaging a lot more within the country? We are using innovation to ensure that we could incorporate a lot more of the labor market, the service sector, a lot more of the manufacturing capabilities within the continent. Because that is the only way we start to grow this middle class or consumer class that would be purchasing the goods and services that you are envisaging, that would be providing you the sorts of labor market, the sort of labor market that is fit for purpose for the 21st century and also sustainable. A lot about the economics of mutuality that I mentioned earlier has to do with re-engineering the value chain, so it's a win-win proposition. It's not something additional that you tag onto the business, but it is part of the business's profit motivation. And so the first thing I want to leave with you is how do we come to re-engineering value chains as businesses? The second is how do we reimagine markets? As I mentioned earlier, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Arrangement has the aim of creating one African market, which, if it works, will be the largest single market on the planet. But is African markets the same as other markets? In many ways they are, but structurally they are not. Because if you look at the market structure in Africa, over 80% are in the non-formal sector, which means they do not have access to the legal protections, to capacity enhancing initiatives that would improve the quality of the output and also productivity. And so when we think about scaling up and growing the markets in Africa, we have to think not just about the textbook scaling up that we learn in business school. We have to think about how do we ensure that we're not leaving any segments of the market behind. That means understanding the integral role that Africa's non-formal sector plays, and the fact that just quote unquote formalizing them does not solve any problem. It creates more problems. How do we as businesses ensure that we are able to position not just our production, but also our marketing in a way that we are inclusive and integrated? Third thing that I think we need to do is that we need to revitalize regional synergies. You're all working in or investing in various African countries, but I know I don't have to tell you about the size constraints in Africa. We have 55 countries, the vast majority of which are really small, both qualitatively and quantitatively. The only way we're going to be able to scale up and have this sort of meaningful transformative if we could write regional synergies. Does the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement answer all our questions? No. Is it a perfect fit? No. But is it a possible first step in the right direction? I would say yes. And there are aspects of this that we need to understand better, and also need to be able to strategize to ensure that we could, as people, as business people, capitalize on this within the African continent, context, but also lay the foundation for longer term growth that is regional and that is also integrated. The fourth thing regarding the labor market focus is that we have to reevaluate the governance development nexus. I can't tell you, I have been working on African economies for a few decades, and it always, puzzles me that when you have investors coming into an African country, the first thing they want to do is have meetings with the ministers and the presidents. And that is because way too much business in Africa is public sector driven, and it's not private sector driven. because I think platforms like this are what we should be having, where we're connecting businesses with businesses. And I think the next step should be businesses with chambers of commerce, and so that we could know what what private sector led business really looks like in an African context. There are parts of the world where the chambers of commerce have done something called collective action against corruption, where the businesses collectively come together and say, as businesses, we are going to do the following, we are not going to do the following. And that's been one way to hold businesses' feet to the fire. Is collective action going to be easy in an African context? Absolutely not, because the lines of demarcation between where the government and the public sector stops and the private sector starts is very blurred. But I think being able to make that distinction is important, and being also able to elevate the conversation so that the costs of weak governance are a lot more apparent, and that we, as the business community, work with the government, work with local chambers of commerce, and work with one purpose to address these issues. I think that we'll find that if we focus on the labor market, not just national, but continent-wide, we begin to see prospects, we begin to see opportunities, and we begin to see innovative solutions to a lot of the challenges whose solutions have eluded us for decades. And to go back to the quote from Winston Churchill, let us not waste this COVID crisis, and let's use it as an opportunity to hit a restart button and start redefining the role of business in Africa, and taking seizing the opportunity to take advantage of some of the new doors that are opening across the continent. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have them. Over to you, Ezzy.
Thank you very much, Raymond. And everybody, Olivia, maybe you could advise here, but everybody could use the Q&A on the right-hand side. And there's also, I believe, a way to raise your hand. But anybody who has a question, please feel free to use the Q&A on the right-hand side. And I think there's a great opportunity for Raymond to address any questions. Thank you.
Hi, yes, we have one Q&A from Sabri Mokrain for Raymond. And the question is, what can be the main actions or means which permit African companies and investors to be connected?
I think thank you so much for that question. I think the first important thing is there has to be the will. There has to be the will to be connected, and there has to be the will to understand how African businesses are synergistic. They feed off and they do amplify each other. And so that's the first thing. You need to be able to recognize the need and recognize the importance and recognize the collective benefit of being connected. What are the means? I think fora like this are the means. The hope is that this would in itself scale up and become a forum where business, where thinkers, where government officials meet to trash out some of the difficult issues that businesses face. A second thing is what I mentioned is we have to support local initiatives, particularly those that are already institutionalized. I know that most African countries have chambers of commerce, and those need to be strengthened, both in terms of their capacity, but also in terms of their positioning in the decision-making process. And so that becomes a credible, viable, independent voice for business, both on the policy and in the policy and regulatory front. And so those would be the two key mechanisms. Have to be preceded by businesses really understanding how they could benefit from this kind of synergy.
I see two questions over here, Raymond. I see a number of questions on the right-hand side, and we only have a few more minutes, so we'll start with the first one, and then we'll see how far we go, okay? As I know everybody's eager with the networking front. But what can be the main actions or means which permit African companies and investors to be connected? That's the question.
You know, the main actions and means have to be the means. I think virtual platforms like this, organizations like Empower Africa that bring businesses together with only one agenda to see how we could scale up, do good, and do business at the same time. And I think that businesses have to be able to identify such initiatives and make the most of them.
Wonderful. And I think the last question for now, but we'll follow up with the additional questions if that's possible. But I think we'll continue to networking in a couple minutes. But there's a question here on financial assistance for startups. Could you elaborate on any programs or how startups can get financial assistance that are in Africa?
Yes, that's a multi-million-dollar question. Everybody's looking for money for startups. There are various entities that are looking at this problem. The United Nations have something called the UN Capital Development Fund, UNCDF, which is an organization that looks at innovative ways to channel the financing to startups and other businesses. We also have a number of other organizations that do things like angel investments, that do things like targeted investments. I think those are also areas that we need to focus on. The problem with startups in Africa is that they are in an ecosystem that is virtually unknown outside the continent. People don't know what the potential is, don't know how to quantify risk, don't know how to analyze the markets. And so getting the traditional financing streams to support startups in Africa is going to be challenging. What we need to do in this case is literally think outside the box. How do we direct financing that is there? One thing that most people don't know is that COVID, the amount of money that Africans living outside Africa send back to the continent is twice the amount of aid that Africa receives. Remittances are 2 times the amount of aid. So you ask yourself the question, why do aid givers have so much more political clout in Africa than Africans who are living outside? It is because there is no institutional framework to channel these funds in a way that gets them to businesses. If you had an institutional framework, as AID has an institutional framework, then you get more of a voice. Then you're able to use technology, you're able to scale up, etc. And so the challenge has to be first, how do we have new financial instruments that meet the needs of startups in markets that people from outside just don't have the wherewithal to understand?
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. So informative. And we really appreciate you, Raymond, Dr. Gilpin. Thank you so much for the keynote. And I'll forward you maybe some of the additional questions later. And maybe we'll get back to the attendees with the answers. I'd sincerely appreciate that. And thank you again so much. And to the audience, please feel free. I just want to mention to stop by the booth Code Monkey. We got a great, innovative, exciting education company over here that is expanding in Africa. And also, of course, feel free to stop by on the bottom right-hand side to stop by and say hi to our team if you want to learn about the Empower Africa Business Network, which is a business platform that connects everybody on an ongoing basis, not just at our events. And I look forward very much to seeing you on our consistent monthly Driving Business in Africa events, and also many local and sector-focused events that we're having. We'll actually be having a event, Israel and Africa Business Collaboration, on the 21st. And we're going to have the Rwanda Value Add on January 26th, really highlighting the tremendous growth and the amazing success stories that are not just succeeding in Rwanda, but how international businesses are looking at Africa as a place to launch their global business and using as a case for success. And I very much look forward to seeing everybody at future events. And thank you all so much for coming. And enjoy the networking and enjoy the upcoming sessions on the rice crop, the housing sector, and the businesses that are pitching and explaining how they're growing and expanding on the continent. So God bless and enjoy. Thank you for coming.